now, Professor Parkin. Yeah. Okay, so just quickly, I just want to say welcome to everybody for our first ever virtual lecture. Today we've got Professor Ivan Parkin, who's going to be doing the talk on COVID. And I guess, is it fair to say you're an expert in the field? Because it was only this time last year we had Professor Ivan booked in to do a talk, but when all this COVID pandemic started, we had to cancel the talk, and I only found out a few days later that Professor Ivan actually flew back from Wuhan City a couple of weeks prior to that. So it's probably a good time, and I suppose the right decision to cancel that particular talk at the time. But perhaps you can talk about that. If anybody has got any questions, there is a chat box on the right-hand side of your screen, so feel free to type away. You can ask your questions, or if you want to ask your question live on the screen, you could do that. I think there is a wave button, but if you want to ask any questions, I'm sure you can just ask away. You'll be pleased to know there's no house rule, there's no fire alarms planned, and if there is, well, there's not a lot we can do now. You all know where the toilets are. We can't, unfortunately, do any tea and coffee today, so I hope everybody's got a drink. And I'm going to hand over to Ivan now, and hope everybody has a good lecture and has a good time. Okay, over to you.
Okay, thanks very much. Thanks very much. Really, the way I'm going to try and run this today, it's more like a question and answer session rather than a formal lecture. I'm happy to, and I will give a brief introduction for about 5 minutes about my background experience and some of the stuff I've done in relation to COVID or COVID mitigation. But I've given Sukhdev a series of questions which people normally ask. So if people are shy and you don't want to ask a question, that's fine. If you do want to ask a question, then they put it in the chat function, or you can put your hand up, or you can just unmute yourself and then come in, and then I'll try and answer it. My connection with St Paul's is that I did have 2 children at St Paul's. So my daughter's just graduated with her A-levels and has gone to York University this year, and she did very, very well in her exams. And my son is still at St Paul's. I am the Dean of Mathematical and Physical Sciences at University College London. So University College London is one of the world's top 10 universities. And in fact, we beat Cambridge last time in our research selectivity exercise. So it's a bit of a research powerhouse, as well as giving excellent education. But I'm Dean of the Faculty of Mathematical and Physical Sciences, which has about 6,000 students in it. And I am in charge of something like 150 professors and 150 lecturers. Now, in my day job, I'm a scientist, and in particular, I'm a chemist or a research chemist, and I have interests in making antimicrobial and antiviral surfaces. So these are surfaces which will kill bacteria or kill viruses on contact. And in particular, we've been looking at hospital-acquired infections. So that's where you go into a hospital and you pick up a disease because of the conditions within the hospital, or from transmission between patients. So my research work has been looking at how to stop that. I've also given the government some advice on ventilation strategies about how you ventilate rooms, and in particular around the Nightingale Hospitals. And so I was involved in some discussions about disinfection strategies for those hospitals. I have research interest also in nanoparticles, and also in looking at transfer of materials between surfaces. So where that's really important for COVID is to try and stop touch-based transmission. That's where if you've got the disease and you sneeze and it goes onto a surface, and then that gives you a chance of picking the virus up as well. I've done a couple of YouTube videos which explain the science behind COVID, and if anyone wants to know that today, in terms of how do the disinfectants work, how do I keep my house clean, how do I what mask should I wear, how do I clean masks, how should I put a mask on and off, or about vaccines or vaccination, all of those areas I'm happy to try and address. And yes, okay, I'm coming. I think Brian's got his, I don't know if you want to mute Brian, we can hear you at the minute, thanks. Sorry. Yeah, so all of those areas I'm happy to try and address and answer questions on. In terms of research publications, I have around, I think, about 900 research publications for my research group. So I run a very large research group, and I've graduated over 100 PhD students. So that's kind of me and my background. And I'm happy if anyone's got any questions they want to kick off, or Sukhdev, you can maybe start with some of the questions for me to run through.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the questions that I'm going to ask you is actually quite relevant to school as well, at St. Paul's as well. And you know, we've asked all the children to keep their distance, make sure you're cleaning your hands, and there's no touching. So perhaps the first question is, why is 2 meters important, and why 2 meters?
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually. So why 2 meters? Well, there have been studies where they've looked at transfer of viruses between people. Now, there have actually been studies, this is not related to COVID, but it's related to influenza, but we think the transmission is very, very similar. If you have a room with 100 chairs, and those 100 chairs are at a 2 meter separation, and you have one person with a viral disease like COVID sitting in that room for 1 hour, you will pass it on average to one other person if you're at 2 meter separation. That's without wearing masks. If you're in the same room and you reduce it to 1.5 meter separation, then you will have 4 people on average would catch the disease. And if you reduce it to 1 meter, then you would go to 13 people would catch the disease on average at a 1 meter separation. Now, obviously, it depends on ventilation and many other things. But one thing about the coronavirus or COVID-19 is that you can get it from exhaled breath. However, the particles of exhaled breath tend to be quite large in size. They're of the order of something like 6 to 10 microns, which is about 1/10 the size of a human hair. So it's very small, but those particles are not very buoyant. And so they tend to sink onto a surface and they don't travel very far. But if you sing, if you shout, you can multiply the distance they travel and your infectivity by over 20 times by singing and shouting. And that's why singing in a choir or singing in church is really not a great idea at all during this potential period. And in fact, there was one case of a US choir. There were 50 people in the choir. One person had COVID. They were singing next to each other. 48 people of the 50 ended up with COVID and 6 died. So it really shows it's critical to keep that 2 meter separation. And if you can, stay outdoors if you are meeting people, because if you're outdoors, there's a wind which helps to blow things away. And also it's really critical to try and wear a mask if you possibly can, because if you're wearing a mask, then you would cut down your risk of getting the disease and transmitting the disease. So 2 meter separation, really important. It cuts down the amount of virus, because when you exhale, the virus tends to sink to the floor because it's embedded in small mucus droplets which you exhale, and so they don't stay in the air for very long. Now, you will have seen studies which shows that you can have vapor which can stay in the air for over 3 hours, and there are reports of that, but that is not from people. This is mechanically ventilated aerosol droplets, which are a lot smaller. And a lot of my work has been focused on how far can you transport aerosols. And we find it really, really difficult to get aerosols to travel more than 2 meters. Our record is 50 meters under really test conditions, but it's really difficult to get it to go past 2 meters. And that's why we've got this 2 meter rule.
Excellent. Okay, yeah. I mean, just before we move on to the next question, we've just had a message from a guest to just ask if we could turn cameras off if you're not asking questions. It's just causing a bit of interference and distorting your camera, your picture. So if I could ask,
it's not the camera that causes the distortion, it's whether people keep their microphones on.
Okay.
So the key thing is to mute your microphone if you're not speaking. Your cameras on are absolutely fine. It won't interfere with the reception. It's whether people keep their microphones on.
Okay, cool, excellent. Okay, cool. I mean, this is probably a good opportunity to ask anybody, guests, if they've got any questions that they would like to ask. I've got a few questions, but I'll give you guys the opportunity. If anybody wants to ask a question, feel free. You know, you can either type in the chat box on the right-hand side, or you could ask away now. So I'll give you 10 seconds in Teachers Talk, 10 seconds to ask any questions. Any it's okay. Right, okay, I've got a question while people think about their questions. Is the vaccine safe?
As far as we can tell, yes. So there are multiple types of vaccine which are going through approval. There's only one which has been approved so far. That has been tested, I believe, on over 20,000 people, and it hasn't seen side effects associated with it, or very significant side effects. There is a report in the very recently of 2 healthcare workers who had an allergic reaction to this. And so what the government has done is that it is recommended that if you suffer from severe allergies, that is, if you carry around an EpiPen at all times because you're worried about severe allergic reactions, for the moment, those people shouldn't have the vaccine. But for everybody else, from all of the older age groups, it's been looked at, it's been risk assessed, and it's been deemed to be safe. So I'm in tier 8 to get an injection, and I will definitely have an injection, and so will my wife and all those people in my family that I can persuade to do it. You really do protect yourself. And from the studies, you get around 95% protection. But there's a key thing with the vaccine. What we don't know is, does it stop you getting seriously ill? And most of the data, which was done in Brazil and in the UK, shows it does stop you getting ill. But does it stop you from still transmitting the virus? So it could be you have the virus, you're not going to get seriously ill, you might be what's called asymptomatic, but you could still be infective to other people who haven't had the vaccination. So it's really important that as many people as possible have the vaccination. My parents are in their late 70s, and I have absolutely insisted on both of those that as soon as it's available, they'll be the first in the queue to get it. It's really safe. There is an anti-vaccine movement at the moment around, which was related to MMR and other things. But to my knowledge, that's complete nonsense. You really should have a vaccine. You really have the vaccine when given as available. It can really protect you. And the key thing I think I can take from a number of the studies is that even of the 5% of people that it didn't protect, none of those 5% of people ended up in hospital with COVID-related activity. And so you really do need to have a look at it so that you can show that it's fine. There was a message in the chat function here. It says, were you alarmed to see the video of the first person receiving the vaccine and the nurse administering the jab didn't clean the skin first before she gave the jab, and she touched a couple of pieces of hospital furniture like a trolley, moving it slightly out of the way? It didn't seem like best hygiene practice. Well, you're absolutely right. I think Harriet wrote that. That's true. I mean, what we didn't see is what happened before and after and how they had cleaned the area. But I mean, I know myself, I went to Milton Keynes Hospital for an eye examination, and I was not impressed at their standard of vaccine, of cleanliness which they had. And in fact, I spoke to the doctors afterwards and to the hospital to give them some advice about how they could improve what they do. And it's just following the basics: 2 meter separation, washing hands and face, wearing a mask. But as far as the vaccine is concerned, it is very, very safe. Please have it if you get asked to have it.
Excellent. Thank you for that question, and thank you for that response. If there's any, I think there's another one. Let's just have a. Okay, that was just a thank you. We've had another question here. This question was about the actual virus itself. Do we know when the pandemic will come to an end?
No. And worst case scenario with this is that we have to live with this forever, and it will never be eradicated. So not a great message to hear. There are only, I think, 1 or 2 cases where vaccination has completely eradicated a disease. So one is smallpox, which, other than in laboratory areas, has been virtually eliminated within the world. And we don't know how long the vaccine will last if you're given it. But if it has what's called T-cell immunity, that protection for people could last many, many years. But we may be in a scenario similar to the flu vaccine, where you have to go for regular boosters on a yearly basis if you're at a certain age. And at the moment, we really don't know. One thing I can say is that this particular type of virus doesn't seem to mutate as fast as the flu virus. The flu virus mutates really quickly. And they've used a really clever piece of science to attack the virus and inactivate it. And the virus, this is an unusual virus. It's kind of a round blob, but it's got lots of spikes on it. And what they've done is that they've targeted those spikes. And even if the virus evolves, it pretty much always keeps that spike structure. And so what the vaccine does, it trains your body to recognize that spike material and for you to produce antibodies which will attack it. So if you see that spike again at some point, your body will recognize that as an invader and will attack it and inactivate it. So it's quite a clever process that they've used. I mean, most people will be aware of the Pfizer vaccine and the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. They're very different in terms of the way in which they work. One of them just uses a small protein sequence called RNA, and another one uses an inactivated but alive virus of something which won't cause a disease and harm. And so I think a combination of these, we may get to a situation where you can reduce COVID right down, but it could be with us like the common cold. And in fact, COVID is like the common cold. It's exactly the same. There were, I think, 6 types of common cold virus that were known. COVID adds a 7th. So, but I think we're on a really good path, and probably in about 9 months to a year's time, we may get back to some semblance of normality, where you can freely meet, you're not too worried. But I think we will still be looking at hands, face, space, even during that period. And it could be as much as a year and a half before we're back to normal. From a university perspective, we're planning for next September to be back to close to normal with some face-to-face teaching. At the moment, everything is online. But we think that the vaccine will be successful, and if the government can roll it out really quickly, we could be in a really good position.
Excellent, thank you for that. Any questions?
Was a couple in the chat. So just to ask Paul's question, do you think COVID will be endemic in society, and will we require a vaccine shot every year? I think that's probably right, Paul. I think that we may well do that. However, because it attacks the spike protein, and that isn't likely to change, we may be in a situation where you don't need it as regularly as a flu vaccine. But at the moment, it's really unknown as to whether we would need it on that kind of basis. A best case scenario is that you can have this and maybe a repeat vaccination in, say, 5 years' time. But I think that's probably the best. It could be that you do need yearly booster shots. And this was something that we've monitored as we carry on.
Okay.
No, so just to answer Harriet's question, is the Pfizer vaccine at -70 degrees when it goes in your arm? No, absolutely not, Harriet. It's not. What they do is they warm it up. But what happens is that particular, and they actually keep it at -78 is the temperature they normally try and keep it at, which is what you can achieve with a dry ice or with a very special refrigerator, which they have in hospitals and universities. When you warm it up, it will only stay viable for a couple of days before the vaccine will decompose. And so what they do is they warm it up, put it in a regular fridge or refrigerator, take it out and then when they inject it into you, it might be cool or feel cool, but it will definitely not be at minus 70 degrees C. If you were to do that, you'll end up with a freeze burn, which would be, and I've had a few freeze burns in the past, they're not very pleasant. So we're definitely not.
Excellent. Okay, cool. And I think there was another question here by Threes, I think. I have heard that most infections, especially new ones, gradually evolve into a non-fatal infection in order to keep its host species in existence. It didn't happen with every infection, but is there a possibility that COVID-19 will diminish naturally to a less fatal infection?
Yeah, that's a really excellent question, actually, Teresa. Yes, there is a good chance. The chance on most of these viral-borne diseases, it's around 80% chance it will evolve to something which is less virulent and less deadly. But there's a 20% chance it could evolve to something which is more scary.
Right.
So I don't want to warn that and everyone have a panic about it, but it's effectively a survival of the fittest as far as the virus is concerned. Just to give you a bit of background, a virus is not alive. It's not a living organism. It doesn't meet the classification for life. But what it is a little factory of chemical molecules which are strung together, which when it invades another cell, it takes over that cell's machinery and produces lots and lots of copies of the virus, which then eventually gets out. But it's not actually living as such. And so when the virus transmits, the virus doesn't want to kill you. What it wants to do is just to propagate and to go to more and more and more and more people. And in fact, if you look at diseases like SARS and MERS, they were very similar to this coronavirus. They're much more deadly. You can have death rates of about 30% or higher across all age groups. But those viruses, because they killed the patient before the patient basically had time to actually infect other people. Whereas for this one, it's very clever in a way, although it's not living, because what it does, in up to 80% of people, they show no symptoms at all. They have the virus, they pass it on to others, they don't know they're ill. If you knew you were ill, you could just stay at home and you would stop the propagation chain, but we don't. It's really sneaky, it gets around that. And if it gets to concentration when it goes to infect someone, or you're a susceptible individual, or you're just plain unlucky, we really don't know, you can end up getting this disease and it can have really serious consequences, hospitalization and in worst case death for some people. So it is a bit tricky. So that was a really good question, and I think it's very likely, and in fact what's happened, there has been some changes to the virus over the last 9 months or so. In some areas it's got less infective, less deadly to people. In other areas, but not by very much, but just by a touch. And in other areas it's got slightly more deadly. So at the moment the jury's out, but I think it's likely over time it will become less deadly to people, but maybe not to the levels of the common cold. Well, certainly not the common cold, maybe not to the level of influenza. I think it will still have a higher mortality rate.
Okay, thank you.
There's a few more questions in the chat as well.
Yeah, there's quite a few coming through. Shall we pick a couple of them out? So oh, we've got that one, yeah. How long does it take after being vaccinated before you are protected? That's a good question.
Yeah, it's a really excellent question. So basically with these vaccines, you need to have 2 injections, and they're typically between 21 days and a month apart. You are not fully protected until 5 to 7 days after the second vaccination. So when you've had the first vaccination, you will have some protection, but it will be limited. You won't get the full protection until about 5 to 7 days after the second vaccination. So it's really important, if you're vaccinated, you go along for both doses. It's critical.
Okay, good. Here we go. Will the 20,000 volunteers that the Oxford vaccine was tested on continue to be monitored? And if so, for how long?
I happen to know this quite well because I've got a friend that's part of the programme. What they don't tell you well, at least what she told me, that if you're on the Oxford vaccine trial, they give the dummy vaccine where they give is not just a saline injection, they actually give you the MMR injection. So you get an MMR booster if you're in the control group, or you get the actual vaccination if you're in the other group. They are still monitoring those patients, and they will still continue to monitor those patients for a number of years going forward. And so, and in fact, they're looking to expand that group and to do some further studies. So it is still going on. People will still be tested, but they haven't observed very severe adverse reactions in people. But my friend who had it, she said that she had the vaccination. For 12 to 24 hours, she felt nothing, and then she had mild flu-like symptoms for 12 hours, and she just rested up, went to bed, felt a bit hot, and then after that, she felt perfectly normal. So there may be some mild effects for people, and in fact, if you do have that mild effect where you do get a slight fever from the vaccination, that's better. You may not feel it, but it actually means your body is working hard to come up with an antidote to that particular vaccine. So if you do get that, if you do get a sort of bit of a hot flush afterwards, you won't feel as bad if you've had real flu, which I have. It's not like that, but you will feel a bit lousy, or at least she did for a certain point of time.
We just had an interesting question come through. I think this might be one that I don't know while you were visiting there, you picked up any information.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I mean, so just to explain, I in addition to being at UCL, I'm also a visiting professor at 3 Chinese universities. And one of the places where, in fact, I've visited it now 4 times is Wuhan, bizarrely. Very small coincidence. So I'm a visiting professor at the Wuhan Institute of Technology. And they think that the virus originated from a live food animal market. And in fact, I visited very, very close to there just prior to everything kicking off. I didn't have any adverse reactions. I wasn't ill when I came. I was ill on a previous trip to Wuhan, but not on this one. Yeah, we do think it's come from there. And they do think it's been transferred from animal species, whether it's from bats or through another vector, through another animal. That's where they think it comes from. I should say that China's banned all of their live animal markets now, and so it's illegal to have those markets operating because of this. So they've really looked to change their practices going forward. But I should say, don't think badly of Wuhan. It's a gorgeous city. It's very cold in the winter, very, very warm in the summer, and the people are incredibly friendly. And there used to be a direct flight from the UK. So please don't be put off. Whenever we can get back to traveling, it is a great destination if you get a chance to go there.
Excellent. Thank you. Here's one. I think, in fact, I can see Paul Lawrence on the screen as well, Paul. I don't know if you want to ask the question yourself, Paul, or do you want me to read it out? Oh, I think your microphone might be turned off, Paul. No, I don't think we can hear you, Paul. I think your microphone might be turned off. You might need to turn it on.
Yeah, I saw him now.
Okay, excellent.
Shall I ask myself?
Yeah, go for it, yeah.
Hello, my question is, 95% efficacy of the recent BioNTech Pfizer vaccine implies that 5% people will not be protected. How would they know that they are not protected? And secondly, would they have to be revaccinated?
Yeah, that's a good question, Paul. Excellent question. I think if they were to be revaccinated, I would make sure that they had a different type of vaccine than the one that they'd had before. So that would be the first thing. And people are looking at mixing different vaccines. And in fact, there will be a trial of that in the UK, where you could have maybe the Oxford vaccine when it's approved, as well as the Pfizer vaccine. Will that offer more protection? At the moment, we don't know. Now, of the 95%, what that means is, the way that they did the study is that they have 2 groups. One group have no vaccination at all. Or they have a different type of vaccine like MMR or anything else. So that's one group. And then they have another group, and that group are the people that are vaccinated. They monitor these people over a series of time, and then they look for the number of people who actually develop COVID over that period between the control group and the people that have had the vaccine. Now, when they did that, if you make a ratio between the two, it worked out around 95% of the people that have been vaccinated had protection and didn't get COVID, compared to the control group who had no vaccination or had a different type of vaccine, one which wasn't designed for COVID. And so that's the difference. But there's a really important point here. That 5% of people, of those 5% of people that got COVID, they had the disease under a relatively mild form, and my understanding is not a single one of them needed to go to hospital for oxygen or ventilator. So even though they weren't fully protected, the severity of their symptoms was not extreme. However, that is a group of 20,000 people. We would need to roll it out to millions to know if the odd person that's been vaccinated could still get the disease. But what my recommendation would be is that if you did get COVID from that, A, you'll develop some antibodies yourself from this because you could get some natural protection because you fought it off. But B, you might want to consider a different type of vaccine, or even in combination. And that could be something that the government does. In particular, the Oxford type vaccine and the Pfizer vaccines work in different ways. And so they could be complementary and give you additional protection. So that could be really quite exciting to look at that.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for your question.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Thank you for that question. Ivan, there's been a couple of questions that have just popped up again. I don't know if you want to have a quick look at this one that we've had from Therese here at 6:28. While Ivan's doing that, if anybody has got any other questions that they'd like to ask, or type in the chat box, please do so. We've had some really good questions.
Yeah, Teresa, that's an excellent question.
Yeah.
Now, my understanding from today, because we actually discussed this at the university, is that the Oxford vaccine may be delayed in terms of its approval. And that's because they did this business of giving a lower dose by mistake to some of the group and then a higher dose to others. So they may have to go back and repeat the trial that they've done, or provide additional data for the regulator. So the regulator's looking at this quite closely at the moment, and that's why the Oxford vaccine hasn't been approved. It was pretty much around the same time as the Pfizer vaccine, but because they made this mistake, they may ask them to go back and get more data. They may not. They may say, okay, it's still fine, you can still have it. But is something that they are looking at, and it may be that they have to repeat the trial or at least enhance the number of people. But remember, the trial takes a long time to do. You have to monitor people versus a control group over at least a 3 to 6 month period. And so if that does happen, there'll be a big delay before there's widespread vaccination within the country. And in particular, they are likely to use that vaccine for the younger age groups, and it may not be available then. Do you want to come in, Paul?
Yeah, a very quick one. It's just a follow-on from the conversation we have just had. Okay, I'm more interested in the Oxford AstraZeneca one, in that it is at normal temperature, whereas the bionic Pfizer one is a cryogenic one. So transportation of this is going to be very expensive, and also we got to look at the underdeveloped world who cannot have the facilities for cryogenic transportation. I'm rather sad to hear that Oxford trial is going to be delayed, because that's the vaccine that is really going to make a difference.
You're right. I should say it may not be delayed. It could be that the regulator does approve it based on the data. But I think one reason why it hasn't come out so far is because of this anomaly in their data. Now, it could be the regulator will just approve it, and that may only take a couple of days. But the regulator may tell them to go back and to add additional data to the trial. So at the moment, we don't know for sure. But your point about transportation is absolutely perfect, because it really is important that you can take it to as many countries in the world as possible, to as many possible people, so that ideally everyone will be vaccinated. The big advantage of the Oxford vaccine is that it can be kept in a refrigerator, and it doesn't cost very much. It's not because they're doing it at cost. AstraZeneca, bless them, it's very unusual for some pharmaceutical company, has said we are going to make no profit from this vaccine, and they're selling those doses. It's around £3 a dose, whereas if you take the other formulations, it's around £15 to £20. But that's really small beer if you consider how much the government has spent on the furlough scheme and for keeping people going. If you pay 300 million or even £500 million to vaccinate the country and it works, my God, you've really got to do it, because compared to what we paid, it's nothing. But if you're going to roll it out across the whole world, you do need to make sure that it's as cheap as possible, which it is at £3, and also you get the people to back it, who will actually come in and say, yep, we want to be able to fund that. So if people like the Bill Gates Foundation are often really good at this, but also it's a role of governments. It's our responsibility to make sure it's rolled out to as many people as possible, because it protects us as much as other people.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, excellent. I think we've got a couple here. Yeah, this was about the trial. I think we've answered that one. I've got a question here about what can schools do to keep students safe? Obviously, we're talking hundreds, if not thousands of children.
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. First of all, the virus really struggles to propagate, and we don't understand why in the very younger age groups. So particularly primary school and younger, it can propagate, it can spread, but it tends not to. And we don't really fully understand the reason for that. However, when you're at a school like St. Paul's, if you're in year 7 or 8, I think it's unlikely you'll spread it. But once you get into years 10, 11, 12 and 13, so this is people between 14 and 18 years old, they've actually grown. They basically behave like adults, and in terms of their ability to spread the virus. And so at those older age groups, they really can spread. In terms of keeping the school safe, I think there's some really simple things that you could do, and in fact you are doing at St. Paul's. I've been very impressed in the way in which you've notified parents of all the changes that you're doing for COVID. It's been absolutely excellent. The ability for the students to wear masks, that's really great. The emphasis on hand washing is really great, and keeping social distancing, again, is really great. And so if you take UCL, for example, we have on campus at any time at the moment around 2,500 to 3,000 students. And we've monitored them because we do all the really careful tests that you can do with PCR tests. We do that in the university ourselves. We've looked to see if there's been any transmission within the university over the last 10 weeks. And we keep a 2-meter social distancing. We wear a mask at all times, unlike schools. And that's maybe something schools can think about. You wear the mask, social distancing, hand washing. We got really good ventilation. When you do that, we've only got one questionable incidents of potential spread at the university. We've really looked and looked and looked, and I've been involved in this, and we really can't see instances of onward transmission if you do the simple hygiene. The problem in schools is that when pupils sit at desks in the classroom, you don't wear a mask for teaching purposes. Now, we insist you wear a mask at university. Now, wearing that mask can really cut down your instance of getting the disease. So wearing masks at all times is really, really important. And if schools wanted to introduce that, that would help to cut down infection. Also, rigorous hand washing, soap and water, 20 seconds, hot water, really vigorous hand washing is really important, because if you have the virus on your hands, that hand washing will inactivate it. Or if you use the little alcohol gels that you can use or hand sanitizer, they can work really well. But if you're using them, I would advise you look on the label and make sure it's 70% alcohol. The other thing I think you can do in schools, there's been a lot of potential transmission on buses and kids coming in on buses to the school.
Yeah.
And I've observed, dropping my son off, that the kids just don't socially distance before and after school. So you can be really great in school, you can keep them at a distance, but when they congregate together on buses, both on the bus or leaving, they don't obey social distancing rules. They sit right next to their friends. They talk to their, right next to someone. That's not great. And I know you can't police that very well, but it does introduce a risk of onward transmission. St. Paul's has actually had quite a number of cases. But the key thing to think about for COVID, and this is worldwide, over 80% of all the spread is due to a spread within the home. And that's someone in the home who gets it from outside, comes in and then spreads it to other people. So only 20% of all the infection is from strangers or from casual acquaintances or meetings. Most COVID infections are from being based at home. But I think St. Paul's does a really excellent job. The messaging has been, in fact, the messaging is so good, I've actually stolen some of it and given it to the university to try and improve our messaging. So your messaging is fantastic. But you do need to police some of the activity of the kids, especially around transportation.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Thank you for that. Been a couple of new questions that have just popped up. Shouldn't everyone be made to wear something if they can?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And we've looked at that at the university, but we strongly advise that people wear a mask. But there are some people that can't. So some people with mental health difficulties, that have breathing difficulties, that have obstruction diseases, wearing a mask is not suitable for them. And they shouldn't be stigmatized because they're not wearing a mask. So some people, it's perfectly valid not to wear one. However, if everyone wore a mask, or as many people as possible would wear a mask, you could dramatically cut the rate of infection. It's really, really important. And there are various grades of masks that you can use. I've got some here, so I'll do a little demonstration. So there's this one, which I think a lot of you probably will have. So this is a surgical mask, which is sometimes used in hospitals. This doesn't give you very much protection, I should say, but it does give you protection. It's probably around about 90% in terms of the protection. The other thing you need to do when you put a mask on and take a mask off is make sure you do it properly. And my pet hate is people not wearing masks properly. You must, when you put it on, make sure it's tight at the top and it's over your nose. Don't do that and go around like a lot of people do. That's absolutely hopeless. You're breathing out. You could be transmitting the virus. You're not helping yourself. Now, the prime reason for wearing a mask is because if you've got the disease, it limits the amount of viral particles which you're then putting out into the atmosphere. And there is some research that shows the amount of viral particles you pick up when you take the disease may influence how badly affected you are by COVID. So if you're wearing a mask at all times when you're out and when you're doing stuff, you're helping to protect, not only protect others, but protect yourself. And the way in which the masks work, if you're going to use a mask, which I really recommend, it must have multiple layers. And what the multiple layers do of different materials is if the virus tries to go through the mask, it will help to strip the virus of its coating because of an electrostatic charge. If you think rubbing a balloon against your jumper, putting it on the wall, it holds. Well, that's the same kind of principle which you get with a mask. The two layers, if they're different materials, rub together, they generate a static charge, and that static charge helps to pull apart the virus and inactivate it. So you might want to use that in your physics lectures, Dev, at some point, but that's really important. Now, there are other grades of masks you can use as well. I've got a couple of others. So this one is known as an N95 mask. Mm-hmm. This gives you a higher level of protection and will cut out a number of viruses. So this is used in more higher risk areas, and it's a lot tighter to wear, and it's a little bit more difficult to be able to speak with this on, but it will give you overall higher levels of protection. Now, if you just bear with me, I've got one other type of mask. I'll just get it. So this is another type of mask, but it's got elasticated head straps, and this gives you the best possible protection. So to put it on is a little bit more challenging. And when it's on, it's really tight against my face. I can feel the pressure. And when I take the mask off, I'm left with an impression. But whenever I go to hospital or I go to a high risk area, I will always wear this type of mask. It's made by 3M. It's fairly readily available, and it will cut out over 95% to 99% of all the viral particles. But the key thing is, once you've got the mask on, you can fiddle with it to start with. Wash your hands before you put the mask on, put the mask on, fiddle with it a little bit. But once you've done that, don't retouch the mask until you take it off. And when you do take it off by the straps, and don't touch the middle of the mask as you're doing it. So that's just some handy tips for putting the mask on and off. I should say, if you've got this kind of mask and you have breathing difficulties, I mean, I've had this on for, I think the most was 6 hours. After 3 hours, I found it more difficult to breathe because it's such a tight seal. So most people can't wear them for very long periods of time. But if you're at high risk, then you can wear that. But saying that, a simple cloth mask will still give you a degree of protection. So really, really do wear it if you can. Marks and Spencer's, I'm not trying to plug them. They've got a beautiful silk mask. It feels really nice against the face. That's also something you can look at.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing those the masks. In fact, we've had a couple of questions about masks just coming through as well. Mask quality seems variable. Would you expand on how to choose what masks? Well, I think you might have covered some of those points.
Yeah.
And the other one was, is the static charge only with synthetic fabrics, not cotton?
No, you can get it with any type. Well, there's it's not just the static charge. There is also a sieving effect associated with the mask, where the mask has got small holes or perforations, and so that can also limit getting things in and out. You can wear, I mean, I personally prefer to have a cotton mask against my face because it feels better. But I'll show you some other, I've just got a couple of other types. This is another type which we've road tested for the university. This is a clear mask, and so you can actually, I put it on. So it's a clear mask, so you can see me talking, I think. It does give a degree of protection. I really hate this because it's got a synthetic foam at the top and it really irritates my skin. And so I just can't wear this for any length of time. So I would recommend that you go for what you feel comfortable with. And if it's made of just 2 different types of material, it will give you a level of protection for sure. If you're really, really worried or in a high risk area, then you can look for a higher grade mask. There are some higher grade masks even than the ones I've talked about here. So there's something called FP3 type mask, but then you're looking a bit like a spaceman, and you've got these kind of big, absorbent pouches for pulling stuff in. So you can go to higher level materials as well. Synthetic, natural, whatever you feel comfortable with. Silk works very well. Even if it's the same material, it's just rubbing up against each other, that can give you a level of protection as well. So, but the key thing, make sure it covers your nose and your mouth.
Excellent. And actually, while we're still on masks, is there a mask suitable for people who wear glasses?
Yeah, I mean, these N95 masks. So when I go to Sainsbury's, I always wear my laboratory spectacles. Now, this is just me and my I guess paranoia, that if I'm in a high risk area, there is a small chance that you could also absorb COVID through your eye. The way in which it will get into your body, there's 3 main vectors: through your nose, through your mouth, or through the mucous membranes in your eyes. So for example, if there's a contaminated surface, someone had sneezed on that or they coughed on that and they had COVID, you touch that surface and then you rub your eye, you could be introducing the virus through your eye into your body. So for me, I always wear glasses if I'm in a high risk area, and I make sure I don't touch the glasses once they're on. And so there are many ways in which it can actually get in. But I have tested a number, and these N95 masks do work well for people with glasses, and your glasses don't steam up if you got it on properly. if you haven't got it on properly, they will steam up.
Okay, cool. Excellent, thank you. Anybody else wanting to come on screen and ask their questions? We've got a couple that I will read out in a moment, but if anybody wants to ask a question.
Yeah. If there are no questions, because I've asked a few, then I would like to ask a very important one. What are the likely side effects, and if there are fatal side effects of the Pfizer vaccine, are there antidotes for that?
As well, they've done this trial. They've had over 10,000 people which have had it, and of those 10,000 people, they haven't observed serious side effects, other than not to the level that people have severe reactions which could make them seriously ill. That hasn't been observed with anyone. It gives far, far more protection. There's a few instances which they've highlighted in the newspaper about people who carry around an EpiPen, that was an issue for them, but they're very, very allergic prone people. They have, they may have a peanut allergy or other things like that. If you don't, then as far as I'm concerned, the vaccine is very, very safe. However, I should also point out there may be very, very rare side effects which would maybe affect 1 in a million people, and we won't know that until the vaccine has gone to that level of people before that could come out. There still may be some small side effects we don't know of, but we've got a very tough regulatory regime in this country, and they would not have approved the virus for people unless they've seen it safe. And certainly for all older people, and I'm saying that anyone that's 50 or older, the risk benefit of having the vaccine versus not having the vaccine is immense. And as you get older, COVID has a kind of hockey stick mortality rate. So if you're in your 90s and you get this disease, you can be up to 25% or more likely to die from it. If you are in your 50s, then you may be of the order of 2 to 3% likely to die from it. If you're younger, then it goes right down to virtually zero as you go to the younger age groups, but it's not completely zero. There's one example of someone who's died between 18 and 24 from COVID without them knowing. Without having an underlying medical condition. So it is possible to affect younger people, but it's very, very, very rare. And one of the issues with COVID is just trying to understand your relative risk. Your risk from taking a vaccination would be of the order of 1 in a million. If you get the disease, your risk of dying could be 1 in 100 or more. And so, you're protecting yourself by over 1,000-fold by having the vaccination, and not just yourself. If it stops onward transmission, you're stopping the transmission within the population as well. So from population health science perspective, absolutely, you should have a vaccine unless you've got a particular reason for not doing it, like carrying an EpiPen. There may be some delay on those people taking it, but for everybody else, please, if you get a chance, have the vaccine.
Okay, hope that answers your question there. There's been a couple new ones. I think one of the questions we may have covered earlier on, one was about the people who have had autoimmune conditions. I have Romberg's or Pari-Romberg's. Should I not have the vaccine?
Yeah, I wouldn't be able to give you advice on that specifically. I think that is something that you'd need to speak through with your GP and your healthcare provider, because there are specific things where they will advise you not to be vaccinated. But what I can say, right, if you're someone in a very high risk group, say that you're having cancer treatment or you've very immunosuppressed, if everybody else in the population is vaccinated, that will stop you getting the disease, because it won't have a host population to spread it from. And so by us taking a vaccine, we're helping to protect the people that are most vulnerable in society. So you're doing society a benefit by taking the vaccine. I'm not trying to be a vaccine preacher here, but it really does help protect people that are in those categories. And they can go out and try and lead a bit more normal life, because a lot of them have been self-isolating at home in a room for nearly 9 months, and that's tough, really tough.
Yeah. And the virus, can the virus live and be infectious on the surface of fruit and vegetables or any other foods? And talking about surfaces, perhaps you want to talk about surface cleaning.
Yeah, I could go on for an hour on that one, but no, in terms of can it live on fruit and vegetable? In principle, yes. In fact, this is some work that we've looked at. And the length of time that the COVID will stay active on a surface really depends on the type of surface. If you have, for example, paper or cotton, if you get COVID on it and then you try and take COVID off from those surfaces, we just can't do it. It seems to sink into those surfaces and never come out. If you go to the other extreme and have stainless steel, COVID could survive on a stainless steel surface under good conditions for the virus for up to 14 days. Could it stay on fruit and vegetable? I think absolutely it could stay on fruit and vegetables. It would be dependent on exactly the type of fruit and vegetables. But if you wash the surface of the fruit and vegetables, if you were to cook the vegetables so that they go to a higher temperature, you will inactivate the virus. If you go to 60 degrees C for 5 minutes, you will inactivate the virus. If you've got a reusable mask, if you put it in your hot wash, you will inactivate the virus and it won't work. If you haven't got a hot wash, if you have very dilute bleach solution, that's the gold standard to be able to clean the surface. If you're in your home and you're worried about surfaces, the surfaces the virus is most likely to survive on are hard surfaces, which are either plastic or metal. So they're the two most which it'll survive the longest on. How can you clean it? Virtually every household cleaning product will inactivate the virus, virtually everything. So whether you use something called benzyl alkonium chloride, which is a spray like Dettol, that will kill the virus. Bleach is the absolute gold standard, not concentrated bleach, but very diluted bleach. That's like 1 litre of water and about 4 tablespoons of bleach into that solution will make a really effective solution. Dip something in it, wipe the surface, it will inactivate the virus in about 30 seconds. So you can really protect yourself with just very, very simple cleaning measures at home, wiping down surfaces on a regular basis. If you do have someone that's self-isolating with you, ideally they should use a different toilet, different set of eating plates and knives and forks and stuff, and they should not really be. They should be isolated within a room if they can. If you can't do that, then once they've used the facility, regular cleaning with bleach and wearing a mask will protect you and also stop further transmission. So you just have to use simple, basic hygiene rules. It's not rocket science. The other thing about the virus is it's inactivated by UV light, which is one of the reasons why, if you remember back in the news in the summer, we had Brighton Beach and there was like 40,000 people packed on the beach, all next to each other. But there were very few onward transmission cases from that day. And the reason was this was the hottest day of the year. There were no clouds in the sky. It had really powerful UV from the sun, which inactivated the virus on the order of just a couple of minutes. So outside helps, sunlight helps. This time of the year, when we're inside and there's virtually no sun, or if there is, it's very, very weak, that doesn't inactivate the virus. The virus will stay live for a lot longer under those circumstances. So be vigilant, but just do the basics. Just make sure your house is clean, and you will help to keep yourself safe and your family.
Okay, that's interesting. So did you say that after that incident in the summer that there was a reduction in the cases?
No, there wasn't a reduction in cases, but what they were expecting is a massive spike associated with all these people, and that didn't happen. And the reason, and in fact, some of my students have done a study relating UV light with the level of transmission, and there is quite a strong correlation where there's high UV light. If you're in the southern part of the world at the moment, or you live close to the equator, the rate of onward transmission outdoors is less because UV inactivates. People still get it because they have sloppy hygiene, and that they're not observing social distancing rules, or they just they don't care. They think, oh, it's not going to affect me. But remember, we're all in this together. We all are protecting everybody else by our own behaviour. And following the rules that the government have set is really, really, really important. They're really tough. I know that. I've not seen my parents since last Christmas. And that's because of this disease, because my mum is in a high risk group. She was contacted by the NHS and told to self-isolate, which is what she's been doing. And so it is, but by following the simple rules, you help to keep everybody safe. It's where people don't follow the rules, especially some younger people, they think they're invulnerable. But what they don't realise is they probably are. COVID is very unlikely to kill them, but you may have some long-term effects. It's something called long COVID, which people have heard about. The incidence of that actually, in terms of very long-term COVID, are very, very low. But one of my friends, she is a doctor at UCLH Hospital. She had COVID back when there was a big spike in London in March, and she's had what's called long COVID. Now, she can still go back to work, but she's completely lost her sense of taste and her sense of smell. It's never returned. And that's what a young person might risk. You may risk having that kind of exposure, never be able to taste something or never be able to smell because you haven't obeyed the rules. I should say that's very unlikely. It's a very low incidence, but you are potentially exposing yourself to that. Okay.
Excellent. Thank you for that explanation. I think we've probably got time for one last question, and then we will have to wrap up. We've had a couple of questions coming through, and I think we've covered some of these. This one about UV light. Could the amount of UV light be relevant in India's rates or other hot countries, as they thought that it would be much worse in Africa?
Yeah, that's true. It may be, and that's kind of what I was talking about in the correlation. Yeah. There's another thing with UV. I mean, don't get too much UV, by the way, because you'll end up getting sunburn. But there does seem to be what UV light does as well on your skin surface. It produces vitamin D. So you get your vitamin D intake largely from sunlight. And during the winter months, most people in this country have a deficiency in vitamin D. And it's potentially, there's a correlation between vitamin D levels and your incidence of getting the disease, or if you do get the disease, it could be much worse. That's why the government is starting to try and roll out for multiple people to actually have vitamin D supplements. And you get that from UV light, or you can get it from tablet form, or by eating lots of fish and things like that, or oily fish. So yeah, UV is important. However, I should say India have had vast rates of infection, but it's a very, very large country. Another factor in why it may not spread so much in Africa, A, they don't have the detection, so they just don't know. And B, the population is very young. And this virus thrives in terms of its mortality rate with older populations like the UK. If you're older, you're much, much a greater risk, which is why the government's got this tier system. If you're over 90, you're first, then over 80s, then over 70s, and so on, until you get to my age group at tier 8, and then it goes to tier 9 over 50. So that's why it's tiered, because those people are more likely to suffer bad consequences. So if you're in those age groups, get yourself a vaccine when it becomes available.
Yeah, so if you get that phone call, make sure you answer it.
But just to finish, I think the key message though for everyone over the next year is hands, face, space. I hate to replicate what Boris came up with as a slogan, but washing those hands, wearing a face mask wherever it's appropriate, and keeping 2 meter social distancing from people really can help you and reduce your chances of getting the disease. You still might get it, but it really helps to reduce the incidences of onward transmission. So please do that if you can.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And thank you for all the questions. Thank you for all the emails we've had over the last few days since we announced this. Thank you to Ivan Parkin as well for giving up your time again, and we really appreciate this, really knowledgeable. I think you're an expert in the field, I can say. So any questions, any further questions, if you've got any comments, any feedback, do drop me an email and I'll try and answer the question. If I can't, I will pass it on to somebody who can. So I do appreciate that. And hopefully in 2021 we might be looking at a second lecture as well. So
yeah. I'm more than happy to give another. I mean, if people wanted another session on this, in a few months' time, I'm happy to do it if people are interested. And also, to do future lectures as well for the school. I'm happy to do that. I mean, I would normally give a presentation and actually go through material which you would answer, you could ask questions on. I've done this format a number of times in the university to very large audiences of 400 or 500 at a time. And I think that the question and answer session for this is the best way to try and get across some of the information associated with COVID. But if you want to forward any emails to me, or if people want to contact me directly, if you've got a question which I wasn't able to answer today, I'm more than happy to try and address it for you.
Okay, absolutely. Cool. Well, have a good evening, everybody, and thank you very much for dialing in. And yeah, have a safe. I can't even say have a safe journey. You are home, so there you go.
Yeah. Stay safe.
Okay, cool. Hopefully, stay safe. I hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
See you soon. Bye. Bye.